Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to Healthy Trees and Home Landscape. We appreciate you taking the time to participate. We'll talk about our speaker, Gary Eichen, in just one second. And Gary, you want to go to that next slide? Okay, so this presentation is part of a homeowner education series that we've started. It's presented by ReLeaf Michigan. ReLeaf Michigan, if you do not know, is the largest nonprofit statewide tree planting and education organization in Michigan. We've been around since 1932, working with communities on tree plantings and all kinds of educational opportunities. The presentation that you'll see tonight is sponsored in part by ReLeaf Michigan and the Michigan Department of Natural Resources Urban and Community Forestry Program, which is headed by Kevin Sayers. And with many thanks to Gary Eichen of SavATree Shrub and Lawn Care. They were very generous with having Gary give up his time this evening. So we appreciate that. And the next slide, Gary. All right, so as I said, we've been around 32 years and educating the public on the value of trees, and we partner with community groups on local tree-related projects. So before I have Gary introduce himself, I want to introduce you to Ashley Locks. She's a project forester with ReLeaf Michigan, and from this point forward, she'll be handling all of the technical side of it. She'll monitor the questions, and she will direct them to Gary as he goes along. He's willing to take questions as they come up, and then also again at the end. We are recording this. When we get a copy of the recording, we'll not only put it on our website, but we will also send it to you, or at least those of you for whom we have an email address, and we've got the RSVP list. And we'll ask you also if you wish to become part of our e-newsletter group so that you can keep up on these homeowner presentations. And as always, we're interested in what topics might be of interest to you. So with that, Gary, I'll turn it over to you, and please introduce yourself and we'll get started.
I can do that. My name's Gary Eichen. I am the Plant Healthcare Lawn Care Manager at SavATree in Troy, Michigan. I have been in the industry for 35 years as an urban forester and arborist. I do a lot of speaking engagements over the last 15 years. I've spoke at Wayne State University, Wayne County Community College, Macomb County Community College, Oakland Community College, Oakland University, University of Michigan, and the Michigan State Extension Service. And I was also lucky enough to do some work down at the Morton Arboretum in Illinois. I am an accredited trainer with the Michigan Department of Agriculture and Rural Development, Certified Pesticide Applicator Core Program. Basically, that's a really long title for a really short job. Basically, all I do is teach people how to become certified pesticide applicators. In Michigan, when you apply pesticide for money, when you're a commercial person doing it, you must be certified. And so I do the teaching that helps people get their certification. So having said all of that, let's get into the program tonight. We are talking about trees, and we are talking about the urban forest. So the first thing we have to do is explain what the urban forest is. It kind of is a misnomer. As you can see here, this is a fairly good description of what the urban forest is. The forest is a place with lots of organic matter and varying degrees of light and temperature and humidity. It is very much alive. Thousands of organisms live in a forest. In an urban forest, not so much, as you can see. In a lot of cases, the topsoil from one subdivision is scraped off, trucked out to be sold to the previous subdivision that was just completed. And so the soil is devoid of living organisms or very low in living organisms. It's basically a mess, highly compacted, lacking oxygen, sometimes lacking mineral availability. In Michigan, we have a lot of mineral content in our soil. The problem is we don't always have availability. In other words, those minerals that exist in the soil must be in a form that's available to plants for them to use them. That job, that availability is the job of thousands of species of microorganisms that live in the soil that convert that mineral content into available minerals. And when there is no oxygen because of high soil compaction or very poor soil conditions, those organisms go somewhere else or they die. And the result is that we can sometimes be planting trees into very, very, very poor soil conditions. So understanding that there is a significant difference between a forest and the urban forest is the first step in choosing healthy trees for a home landscape. Second thing you want to do, because of the potential for there being poor soil, is to soil test. Soil testing will give you what minerals are there. It also can show you whether they are in an available form or not, which is something on a soil test called base saturation. And it can show you pH levels, organic matter content, etc. Now, we are lucky in the state of Michigan. We have a very good land grant university, Michigan State University, even though I'm a University of Michigan football fan. MSU is a good school when it comes to soil testing and things related to trees and lawns. So this is where you want to go. It costs $10. They will send you a kit. You can put the soil in, mail it off to them, and they will send you back a soil test result. They will also give you a link to that soil test result where you can go look at it on a computer. So it's www.spnl.msu.edu/ I don't remember because my camera picture is right in the way and I'm trying to remember what that was. But if you don't have the / you can go there and put in the search box, because this is the Plant Nutrient Laboratory. That's what the SPNL stands for. You can put in their search box soil test and it'll take you right to the home lawn and garden soil test. All right, so step one, before I talk to you about trees, I want to talk to you about cultural practices related to trees, because you can pick the best trees in the world. And we do have some very good nurseries around here, around Metro Detroit, but you can pick the best tree in the world. But if you don't plant it right, and if you don't take care of it properly, it's not going to establish. Once trees in Michigan get established, they do fairly well for the most part, even in some really poor soil conditions. But if they're not planted properly, if they're not cared for properly, they do not have a long lifespan. So the first thing you want to do is plant it correctly. On the left is incorrect. On the right is the correct version. The hole for a tree should be twice the size of the root ball. That is not twice as deep. That is twice as wide. And the reason for that is because most of the roots, over 95% of the roots, are lateral. There are only 6 species of trees in Michigan that have a taproot. Most trees do not, and the roots grow within 18 inches of the surface. Trees do not put out very deep roots simply because the deeper you go, the less oxygen there is. And oxygen is a key component to life. So when you create that large planting hole, you allow those roots to move into softer soil. When you shave the sides in the incorrect picture, it's very difficult for roots to penetrate that interface. You also want to plant a little shallow, because the weight of the root ball will eventually cause the tree to settle, and you don't want it to get too deep. You want the basal flare of the tree, which is where the roots attach to the trunk, to be showing above the ground. You do not want them below the ground as they are in picture number 1. So shallow is better than deep, and a nice wide hole is awesome. That's the best thing you can do for planting a tree. Now, one of the things in these pictures that I'm not a super fan of, if it's a very small tree, it's okay, is stakes and guy wires. You want the tree to move with the wind. And the reason is when the tree senses that it's moving in the wind, it puts out stronger roots to compensate for that. The feeling that it has, and I hate giving human terms to trees, but in this case, it is a viable statement. The feeling that it has of moving encourages the tree to promote stronger roots. So if you tie the tree down for a long period of time, that slows the establishment of the root system. So for a year, maybe a year and a half, a guy wire and a stake like that is fine, but they should be removed, we'll say a year and a half at the outside, so that the tree begins to move and realizes that it needs stronger roots. When you don't plant properly, it can lead to some issues with trees. The one on the left is called girdling roots. And what happens are the roots begin swirling around the tree trunk. Instead of extending out from the trunk in straight lines or relatively straight lines, they begin swirling around the tree. And poor analogy for all you dog and cat lovers, it would be no different than buying a puppy and never letting the collar out. As the dog grows, that collar is going to get too tight. That is what's happening here. You can see these roots are pressing on the trunk, and as they do, they restrict the flow of water and nutrients because the conductive tissue of a tree is directly under the bark. So anything that presses on that bark is restricting the movement of minerals and water through the tree. On the right, you have potential for an issue called basal trunk rot, which comes from piling mulch against the trunk of a tree. Improper mulching kills as many trees as any disease on this planet. Improper care and maintenance of trees. In fact, Ohio State University did a study in Cincinnati. It was a 10-year study of what killed trees. And the ratio, 92% of the trees that died in Cincinnati in that 10-year period was a result of human action. Most of it was weed whipper and mower injury slamming into the trunk. Others was improper planting, improper mulching, improper watering, in other words, poor care. So what happens here is the mulch is piled against the trunk. The mulch retains moisture, and that moisture begins to slowly rot the bark off. As a result of that, the bark's gone or badly damaged, and it exposes the tissue that's under it. And once that tissue is exposed to air, it dies. And that is the tissue that causes, that conducts water to move through the tree. So once the bark is gone, the tissue that's directly under the bark will fail. And that is the water conductive tissue of the tree.
Gary, before you move on, can you
Sure.
talk about what causes girdling roots?
Girdling roots can be caused by a couple of things, actually more than a couple of things. Number one, it's caused by trees that have been balled and burlapped in a nursery too long and continually watered. When you water a tree that's tied in burlap, those roots are growing. They're actively growing. That's a living tree. They're doing exactly what they're supposed to be doing, but unfortunately, they don't have ground to spread out. They go out, they hit the edges of the burlap, and they start swirling around the tree. Then you buy the tree, you take it home, put it in the ground, and its swirling action continues. There's also the issue, there are certain species of trees that are genetically prone to this issue. whether they've been taken care of absolutely perfectly, they still develop girdling roots. One of the most offending, or the tree with the most genetic issues, is the Crimson King Norway maple, which is the deep maroon leaf maple that's on the market. Acer platanoides is one of the worst trees to buy. I do not recommend the purchase of Norway maples at all. They are listed by MSU as an invasive tree. The little helicopter seeds do not need fertilization, and they can grow. They propagate themselves. They spread like wild. They are very bad at lifting up sidewalks because they're very shallow rooted. And they are also highly prone to girdling roots. So they grow pretty good for 15 or 20 years, and then they start to die because they have girdled themselves. So girdling roots can be the result of human intervention in a bad way, or they can be a improper planting. The hole that I showed you on the too narrow causes girdling roots, or it can be, the tree can be genetically predisposed to producing girdling roots on its own. I hope that answers the question.
Yep, thank you.
All right, so what you want to do in a perfect world, and I realize we do not live in a perfect world, but in a perfect world, you would want to mulch the tree 2 inches thick all the way out to the drip line or the edge of the longest branches. The reason is that a tree's roots expand exponentially as high as the tree. If you have a 60-foot tall tree, the roots have spread out under that tree 60 feet. That's how roots grow. They are lateral. They are not deep. They do not go deep into the ground. They are lateral. So with the width of the mulch that wide, you are covering probably 70% of the root system. The large percentage of what's called the biomass, or the living roots of the tree, which are the roots that uptake water and mineral content. And that is the important part. What you are also doing is you are reducing the odds of your mowing service, or possibly your husband, going out with a weed whacker and hitting the trunk of the tree because grass has grown up to the trunk of the tree. Growing grass right up to the trunk of the tree is one of the worst things you can do for a tree, for 2 reasons. One, how much grass do you see in a forest? None. There's a reason for it. Grass and trees do not coexist very well. We have to give the trees a little bit of what they need and the grass a little bit of what it needs, and create a more viable environment for both to survive. But in the forest, there is no grass under trees. And it's really hard, if you've ever had a maple or an oak, to grow grass under trees, because most mature maples and oaks, hickories, a lot of other very large trees, when they reach a certain size, can uptake between 20 and 30 gallons of water a day. So you have to do a considerable amount of watering to keep grass growing under a tree. Tree is a very powerful water resource user. So mulching like this keeps grass away from the trunk. Grass can also cause moisture to remain against that bark, causing the same kind of basal trunk rot that mulching, poor mulching methods would also cause. So one of the things that occurs in the urban forest that doesn't occur in nature very, very rarely is overwatering. Humans, for some reason, just love to water plants. And I understand that it can actually be therapeutic to go out and water your flowers and your shrubs and kind of relaxing. But in many, many, many cases, they do not need watering. And what happens as a result of that excessive watering are these 2 situations right here. This is a disease. This is called Phytophthora cinnamoni. It is a root rot disease, a water mold, which is a very large fungus. You can actually, this is so large that it can actually be seen in standing water. It swims like little tadpoles. But it is a virulent pathogen and disease destroyer of roots. Phytophthora was the pathogen that caused the great potato, the Irish potato famine back at the turn of the century, and caused the massive influx of Irish people to immigrate to the United States. Hundreds of thousands of acres of potatoes were killed by this pathogen. And unfortunately, your most susceptible plants are your broadleaf evergreens like rhododendron here in this picture. Behind it are PJM rhododendrons, taxus, holly, azaleas, euonymus. These are all very susceptible to overwatering and this disease. On the right, we actually see a deciduous tree. This happens to be a smooth bark hickory that is also infected with Phytophthora. And it is a lethal disease of plants. It will kill them. Now, let me give you an example on how much watering we do that is unnecessary. Boxwoods that have become extremely popular in the last 5 to 10 years. It is recommended by the Royal Horticultural Society, the Royal Boxwood Society, which is a horticultural society in England, that boxwoods only be watered once a year. We water them once a week. I have seen people water them once a day because they're planted near the lawn, and the lawn usually needs daily watering or every other day watering. And so the boxwoods get way, way, way too much water. Trees in general get too much water. Plants in general get too much water. We really need to look at what our plants need. And in a lot of cases, our plants will start showing us symptoms of the need for water. The leaves start hanging, the leaves start curling and pointing downward. That's a sign that it needs water. The plant is not dying. It's simply telling you that it needs water. That's when you water. Regular watering of most plants does not need to occur. Overwatering kills more plants in Metro Detroit than any single other organism or problem there is. So if we are going to irrigate the tree, we irrigate roughly in the same zone, but we don't go as close to the tree. A large tree like this, you could stay 8 to 10 feet away from the trunk if you were going to irrigate it. The roots that are up that close to the tree are roots called buttress roots. They hold the tree in the ground, but they do not uptake water and nutrients. You remember I used the term biomass. Those are the living roots called feeder roots that are out farther from the tree. So you are looking at watering at the drip line. That will help you hit the most beneficial roots for the uptake of water. I have a 60-foot European tricolor beech in front of my house. I water it twice a year, once in July and once in September. People have no idea what I'm doing when I stick the steel rod in the ground about 2 feet around this enormous tree in my front yard. None of my neighbors have had the courage to come up and ask me what I'm doing. But I am watering that tree because it is beach and or an urban area are sensitive to air pollution and environmental concerns. So, all right, so we've looked at some cultural practices. I'm going to give you some species of trees that I highly recommend be planted in Metro Detroit. They are zone ready, meaning they are completely adapted to both Michigan's rather unpredictable summers and our unpredictable winters. What was it, 2 years ago, 3 years ago? We hit double-digit below zero temperatures. The trees I'm going to recommend can all tolerate that. They can also tolerate high 90s. Most people don't know this. If you were to list the 10 states with the highest humidity, I am willing to bet that Michigan would not be on the list. But in reality, Michigan is number 5 in the United States for relative high humidity. And the reason is Lake Huron, Lake Michigan, Lake Superior, et cetera, et cetera. We have a lot of moisture in the air, and we are the 5th highest state in humidity. Number one, Alaska. You don't think about it, but Alaska is east of the Pacific Ocean, and the trade winds that blow that salt water across the air mass of Alaska cause a very high relative humidity. And that's just trivia in case you're ever on Jeopardy and the question is US states with the highest humidity. All right, so when it comes to conifers, which are known as evergreens also, these are some of the trees that are recommended. You will note that I have a question mark next to white pine. And the only reason I have that question mark there is because in Metro Detroit, we have cities that have very high clay content. White pine is a sandy soil tree. It must be planted in sand. It does not like clay. The two trees at the top of the list are far and away the best trees. Norway spruce and Serbian spruce. And the reason I put Serbian there, and I think I have a picture of it, it is on the right. You will notice that it has a blue tinge to it. This is a really unique tree that very few people plant, but the tops of the needles are green and the bottom of the needle are blue. So as the tree moves in a light wind, the tree changes color from green to blue. Very cool. And if you want a blue tree, this is the one. Do not, and I will show you here in about 20 minutes or so, multitude of reasons why you should never buy a Colorado blue spruce. You should never plant a Colorado blue spruce. You should never own a Colorado blue spruce. Am I getting my point across? I hope so. On the left, we have the Norway spruce. If the eastern white pine wasn't the state tree of Michigan, this should be. This tree is tough as nails. It does not have special soil requirements. It grows, as you can see, very stately with sweeping, upswept branches that curve as they come out of the tree. As it matures, they point upward. So it doesn't expand width-wise as fast as it expands height-wise. Now, having said that, it can get to 120 feet and about 50 feet wide. So this is can be a very big tree. The Serbian spruce doesn't get quite that big, but can. So if you are looking for large conifers, you need to understand that they have to have some room to grow. But if you want a blue tree, this is the blue tree you want to get. On the smaller side, I am a monstrous fan of cypress. And the reason for it is, being an arborist and an urban forester, I deal with insects and diseases a lot. And these particular cypress, and I'm going to show you some more cultivars of cypress, these specific species have no insects and no diseases at this point. Now, as soon as I say that, in the next few years, something will sneak into this country that affects cypress. But on the left, we have the Nootka cypress, which can get large. That can get to about 60 feet. Anoki cypress, not quite as big, maybe a 20 to 30 foot height range and not nearly as wide. You can see that the upswept branches of the Nootka too. It's actually called a weeping tree, but in true horticultural terms, it is not a weeping tree, it's an upright tree. All right, these are cultivars of cypress. Now, what am I meaning by that? Anytime you're in a nursery and somebody that works there comes up and says, oh, we have this beautiful cultivar over here, that means that tree was made by man in a laboratory. And when you buy those trees, they are just that much weaker than their native cousins because they were grafted or created to grow a special way. Now, why am I talking like cultivars are not a great idea to buy, but yet I'm showing you 5 cultivars of cypress? Because cypress can be cultivated to do all kinds of crazy things, and it doesn't bother it at all. This is a very adaptable, very hardy, tough plant that should be used to replace junipers, arborvitae, because deer will not touch cypress. So these are, what you have here is upper left corner. This is called gold tip cypress. The one right below it is called Gold Coast. The one in the middle on the bottom, I'm just going to call that a bowling ball on a stick because I have no clue what that is. And then the green one, I can't remember the name of it offhand, but these are all cultivated to grow smaller. Those ones in the upper middle, what you are looking at is about all it's going to grow. That's about as big as it gets. And the one upper left, the gold tip, and the one on the right, which is also a gold tip, those are dwarfs and will not exceed maximum 6 to 8 feet. And I think the one on the right, the gold tip on the right, is about 3 foot. So these are small, they don't require the space. And as you can see, they have a very nice look to them.
Gary, is there any specific soil requirements for growing cypress?
No, that's the other thing is pH level, they don't really care. Nutrient content, they'll adjust to pretty much whatever they plant it in. If you plant them in clay, you need not to water as much as you might otherwise. They do not like wet feet. They like to get water, but they use it and then want to go an extended period without water, which also means that maintenance-wise, they're very low use and very forgiving. And if you make a mistake and forget to water them, they're not going to die. They store nutrients and water very well. So they're very tough little dudes. They don't look like it. They look like little delicate things, but they're actually not. All right, large shade trees. Oaks. When I get to the end of this presentation, I'm going to talk specifically about oaks. Won't get into it right now. Oaks, to me, are outstanding trees that need to be taken care of. They basically, oaks fall into 2 groups. They're called the white oak group and the red oak group. And most other species of oaks fit into one of those 2 families, okay? So we're going to talk about that later. Tulip poplar is a good tree. It's very drought tolerant. It can sometimes get messy and it can get pretty darn big. It's related to the cottonwood, but please do not mistake it for a cottonwood. It is not. Tulip poplar is a much stronger, much better looking tree. European beech, I highly recommend beech trees. They're great. Hackberry is one of the greatest trees ever, and no one ever plants them. Hybrid maples are cultivated maples. I put 2 here. One I hate and one I love. Red Sunset is a grafted tree in the red maple family. That is a terrible, terrible tree. Autumn Blaze is a mix between red maple and silver maple. That is a very fast growing but very strong tree for being cultivated. As I said earlier, cultivars usually are not real strong, but this one happens to do very well, even in poor soil conditions. London plane tree is almost identical to a sycamore. It takes an expert to know the difference between a sycamore and a London plane. Dawn redwood, bald cypress, sweet gum, ginkgo, Kentucky coffee tree. One of my favorite trees in the entire United States is a Kentucky coffee tree. This is a European beech. It grows natively very close to the ground, usually has a magnificent structure. Some people, like myself, have limbed them up, basically so we can walk under them. Me being 6'4", and 60 plus years old, I don't crawl around under trees very much anymore. This is a hackberry. It has from a distance, a resemblance to a maple, but is much tougher, does not cause lifting of sidewalks. Its roots go a little deeper, perfectly adapted to Michigan, very tough, no helicopters, no mess, no muss, no fuss. Very tough, disease and insect-free tree. Whoops. This is the Kentucky coffee tree. This is a magnificent specimen of a tree. It can grow to 120 feet tall, and about 60 feet wide. If you have a big area for a big tree and you've got some time to watch it grow, because it's going to take a few years to get to this size, it is a magnificent tree to grow. In the medium shade trees, we have horse chestnut, river birch, yellowwood, which is a kind of a relative of the maple, Zelkova, paperbark maple, which is one of the most beautiful trees in the world, hornbeams, both American and European, SavATree, black gum, and these last two that I threw in here because they're a couple of my favorites is ornamental trees, is the Persian Parrotia and the Stewartia. These are great ornamental trees, and these are all available at nurseries. If the nursery doesn't stock them, it's only because people don't buy them. If you go in there and ask for them, that you want to see a Persian Parrotia, they'll probably take you. They probably only have one or two, but I bet you they have them. It's just that people don't plant these trees, and all of these, I would not be recommending any tree that is not well adapted to Michigan. This is a Zelkova, a fully mature Zelkova. The color is magnificent. And one of the things about this tree is it doesn't change color all at once. As you can see, the interior leaves are still green and the exterior leaves turn a burnt reddish color and yellow. So this tree has incredible visual effect. Paperbark maple, one of the most beautiful trees there is. The bark is a brilliant orange, and in the fall, this is what you get every year. Perfectly adapted. If you take care of it and plant it right and prune it, and you are going to have one gorgeous tree. Black gum, also known as a tupelo. These are very popular in Ohio, but for some reason, in 30 years in this industry, I have seen 3, and I have no idea why I'm not seeing more. That is a gorgeous fall tree with a great shape. That's not pruned that way. That's the way they grow. This is a Persian Parrotia, and it is a smaller tree, probably only grows to about 20 or 30 feet, but that fall color is unmistakable. And you're going to get that every year, insect and disease free. And this is a Stewartia, pretty close to the Parrotia. A little thinner and wider. It tends to get a little wider, does need some room to grow, but if you are looking possibly at a Japanese maple, which is susceptible to winter injury in the state of Michigan, this tree right here laughs at winter injury in Michigan. All right, small trees. These are trees 20 feet and under, and mostly way under. Small trees, Cornelian Cherry, serviceberry, redbud, a couple of kinds of dogwoods here, and you'll notice I do not have Florida dogwoods. There's a reason for not planting Florida dogwoods in Michigan. I think that we just picked up on the reason. Yes, Florida don't belong in Michigan. They don't live near as long as they do in southern states. Now, it's not exclusive to Florida. They do well in Georgia, North, South Carolina, Alabama, not Michigan. But the pagoda dogwood is a very beautiful tree. The Coosa dogwood is one of my favorites. It has outstanding flowers. Magnolias, scab-resistant varieties of crabapples, which there are quite a few now that do not get apple scab. And one of my personal favorites is the Japanese tree lilac, which I'm going to show you. This is a Cornelian cherry, totally adapted to Michigan, very brilliant yellow fall color. It almost looks like an enormous forsythia in the fall. And relatively, I would say about 80% insect and disease free. There's your Japanese tree lilac. A mature Japanese tree lilac will produce flowers the size of footballs. I planted 2 for clients in Pleasant Ridge, and they have told me they have people driving down their road and stopping and asking what kind of tree it is because they can smell the flowers inside their car. When I'm talking, it smells like a lilac, I am talking, it smells like a lilac and like 6 to 8 houses down. It is absolutely fragrant, and the flowers can get as big as footballs. So it's quite an amazing tree, and it is relatively upwards of 90% plus insect and disease free and perfectly adapted to Michigan. All right, so we've looked at a bunch of trees that I recommend. It's time we look at some trees that, as a forester and arborist, I can't stand. Blue spruce. Blue spruce should have never been brought to Michigan. The reason it was because people get caught up in the USDA zone thing. That zone 5, zone 6 trees doesn't matter, right? Colorado is the same USDA zones as Michigan. The Front Range of the Rockies is zone 5, zone 6. So everybody figured, okay, it was cool. Let's bring it to Michigan. The problem is environmentally speaking, Colorado does not do what Michigan does. There's very few states that do what Michigan does. We go from 40 degrees one day to 60 the next. In fact, I think that's supposed to happen this week. Today it was 36 degrees, and I think day after tomorrow it's supposed to be 60. Colorado does not do that. And what happens when you have conifers, they are very softwood trees. And so those massive swings in temperature cause the trunks to split. That weakens the trees. You can't see those splits because they're very small. But the problem is they do occur, and they cause the tree to be stressed and weakened. On the left, we have a picture of Cytospora canker, which is basically an incurable cancer of Colorado blue spruce. And because there's so many, this disease has now been spread to other spruces that wouldn't normally get it. But because there's so much inoculum from so many blue spruces, I would guess that of the blue spruces I've seen in 30 years, 70% or more are infected with Cytospora canker when they reach 15 to 20 years old. So there's a lot of inoculum, and that is affecting other spruce that would not be normally infected by Cytospora canker. On the right, we have a needle disease called Rhizosphere needlecast. This is a disease that requires continual spraying with disease controls to control it. And you can see what happens to the tree if you don't control it. That tree looks horrible, all right? These trees were never intended for Michigan because of the difference in our environments. We can't say temperatures and humidity alone. We have to say environments, because things in Michigan occur differently than things in Colorado do. So if you do have these, take care of them, enjoy them for as long as you have them, but they are going to start declining, and you're going to have to make replacement choices. And I showed you some wonderful choices that you have to replace them. Austrian and Scots Pine. Austrian were brought into this country in droves by the shipload full. And that is N with a P. I hope that came across on the audio okay. Because they actually come from 2 regions. Austrian pines, you would think, oh, well, yeah, they come from Austria. Yes, over there, they are called the European black pine. And yes, they do come from Austria. But there is also a different strain of Austrian pine that comes from Morocco, Egypt, Libya, all around the Mediterranean. And when demand for Austrian pines couldn't be met by importing from Austria, many wholesalers started bringing in the strain of Austrian pine that grows in Morocco and Egypt. Now, offhand, I'm not Chuck Gatica, the weather guy, but I pretty much can tell you that the temperature ranges and the environmental conditions between Michigan and Egypt are just a little bit different. Okay? You with me on that one? So what happens is these trees get to be about 15 to 20, 25 years old and then begin declining rapidly. And as a result of that, there are over 12 insects and diseases that affect these trees and kill them regularly. It is very rare that I see an Austrian or a Scots pine that lives to maturity because of the issues of it not being adapted to being in Michigan. The top left picture is Diplodia tip blight, which is a needle disease that actually enters the branches of the trees and will kill individual branches. Top center is one gallery, one nest from the beetle you see right below it. That is the red turpentine beetle. It's a Dendroctonus species. Dendroctonus in Latin is tree killer. That nest is made by one adult female that carves out an enormous section behind the bark to place her eggs so her young have plenty of vascular tissue to feed on, and they will kill the tree. On the right is Dothostroma needle blight. On the bottom left is Zimmerman pine moth. On the right, lower right, is a caterpillar called pine sawfly. This is just a representation of 5 of the 12 insects and diseases that affect these trees. Do not buy them. They will not live a full and valuated life. They will not look good as they get older. All right, so this is a tree that has no business being a tree. It just was born to be a piece of junk. It was imported around the turn of the century by a gentleman that was looking for a tree, and he thought he was doing the right thing. He found it growing in China by a stream bed. Then he went up into the mountains and he saw the tree growing there. And then he went out into the plains and he saw the same tree growing there and realized there's basically no environment that this tree can't grow in. Then came the realization that this type of pear tree, which Bradford is one of 3 or 4 in the family called Callery pears, that he imported into this country, produced sterile fruit. There is no pollination of these trees. They flower, and then they produce very small, hard fruit, which we as in the horticulture business, we call insignificant fruit. The fruit is sterile, it does not drop. The birds eat it, everything's fine. They were chosen to be used as boulevard trees because they do not drop the fruit on the sidewalk, and the fruit doesn't rot, drawing bees, and because of the sweetness and all of that. And it was believed to be the perfect boulevard tree. Well, what has happened over the course of the years, and it's been, well, almost over 100 now that this tree has been around, or close to it, is that the sterility that they had is no longer in effect. That this tree, nature has learned, and I don't know if you remember the movie Jurassic Park, but there was a scene in there where the dinosaur guy, the dinosaur expert, said, nature has a way of overcoming everything that man does. And here you go. That's what's happened to the Callery pear. It no longer is sterile. It is being pollinated, and it is spreading uncontrollably. It is an invasive tree. It has been banned for sale in Ohio, and I wish Michigan would follow suit. It has no redeeming qualities whatsoever. This, as you can see, has literally fallen apart as a result of high winds. The wood is very soft. The tree, there is a cross right at the Ohio border of I-75 northbound. There is a farmer that planted 25 of these in around the mid to late 80s as a windbreak for the field that was right next to it, so he could farm it a little later in the season and break the wind from I-75. That field is no longer in effect. It has completely been taken over by over 500 Callery pears that have spread as a result of losing their sterility and have literally taken over the field. And for about 2 weeks in the spring, it's gorgeous. It's a field of white flowered trees. And then the rest of the year, it's just a mess. And the guy lost the use of that entire field. These trees, the branching habit is what we call included. It grows very close together, and the trees literally push themselves apart. As the branches get larger in diameter, they push against each other and cause the tree to just fall apart on a perfectly sunny blue sky, no high winds or nothing. All of a sudden, a branch will fall off your tree. This is what it looks like when the branch separates. This was not storm damage. This was just a branch that had reached its pressure point and was pushed out of the tree by the tree itself. Now, in the last 4 years, a new disease has entered the United States. We don't know where it came from. We believe somewhere in Europe. It was originally called European pear rust, but we found out that that name wasn't accurate. It is actually trellis rust. It's a member of a very large group of rust diseases called gymnosporidiums. And this is what it looks like when it infects a pear. And it can make an otherwise fairly decent looking tree look really ugly in a short span of time. So now you have a tree that comes apart in storms, that comes apart by itself, that has lost its sterility and therefore is now invasive, and is now being infected by a leaf disease that causes massive disfiguring. This tree is definitely not something I recommend. In fact, I am so strongly opposed to them that I recommend, if you have one, to remove it as soon as possible. All right, so I wanted to give you this. This is crabapples. I know people love crabapples. I do too. They're beautiful flowering trees. But unfortunately, the first generation of crabapples, if you will, cultivars that were created, were not resistant to a foliar disease called Apple Scab. This is a website that you can go to. This is Integrated Pest Management at Iowa State University, and they have a list of crabapples that are resistant to apple scab, that do not require treating, that will not become infected, very high resistance. And you can go there and download the list. It's in a PDF form, and go shopping for crabapples with the list of resistant cultivars. The foliar disease apple scab, this tree is highly infected with it. And as you can see, a tree should not be without leaves in July. It's not good for the tree, and it's definitely not a good look for your property. So if you are going to buy a crabapple, please go to this website and download the list of resistant crabapples. All right, so that was your tree talk, and now we're going to talk about the importance of oaks in Michigan. And this is a disease that I've taken a personal interest in because it has the potential to devastate this state without question, without hesitation, and I will not qualify that statement. This makes Dutch elm disease look like a Cub Scout party. This is nothing. Dutch elm disease was nothing in comparison to what this disease is capable of. It is not an invasive. It has only been found in North America, Canada, and Mexico. And unfortunately, Michigan is one of the places that it has been found, and it is doing quite a job of killing oaks. And well, I shouldn't say unfortunately. Fortunately, there is something we as just individuals can do about it. And it's easy. We could control this disease, and we don't need fancy chemicals. We don't need fancy science. All we need is one thing. And I'm going to tell you exactly what that one thing is. But first, let me explain it to you. When Dutch elm disease hit back in the 60s, American elms, because they were an urban tree, basically only represented about 0.5% of Michigan's trees, if that. It's probably more like 0.05%, 0.5%, right? It's hardly, 0.05%, I should say. It wasn't much, but yet we remember the thousands of trees dying. Michigan has hundreds of thousands of trees, hundreds of thousands, if not millions. And I think it is somewhere in the 52 million trees, or something like that. Oaks account for 30% of Michigan's trees. Think about this state with 30% less trees. We are talking an arid desert. and we can't allow that to happen. Oak wilt invades the vascular tissue of the tree. As it moves through the tree, it forms blockages, something like varicose veins, but they're actually called tyloses, and they're bumps that expand within the conductive tissue and block it. Because they're blocking the water movement of the tree, the leaves begin to fall off the tree. And that is how oak wilt kills the tree. There are two families of oaks, as I told you, the red oak group and the white oak group. Red oak groups live 3 to 6 weeks once infected. They die very quickly. They have no defense against this disease. White oaks tend to live a little longer. They fight it off. They wall off the disease. They keep it from moving as quickly. And so it doesn't kill them right away. In fact, the tree may live years before it succumbs, but eventually it will succumb to oak wilt. This is the symptoms. Now, what's important here is that we know two things. Leaves fall off trees for reasons other than oak wilt, or I should say oak leaves fall off trees for other reasons. When you have an oak wilt infection, the leaves fall singularly. They fall individually. Squirrels don't take leaves off of trees individually. If leaves are falling off the tree in the middle of the summer, you need to call an arborist, and you need to get the arborist out there ASAP, because you need to diagnose whether that is oak wilt or something else. A drought, an extended drought, can cause leaves to fall off a tree. Just because the leaves are falling doesn't mean an oak wilt, but it is one of the symptoms. The other thing that I want you to know about these leaves is that when they begin to turn color like this, everything in its path turns color. You'll notice the veins of these leaves are turning color as well. When drought hits a tree, the last thing to turn color are the veins, because they have water in them. So they stay green. Oak wilt stops all water movement. So there is no veins staying green. The veins turn brown just as quick as the leaf tissue turns brown. Red oaks up at the top are the leaves with the pointed tips. White oaks have the rounded tips. If you are not sure if you have oaks, I put the website you can go to. This is the International Society of Arboriculture, where you can enter your zip code and find an arborist in your area to come out and identify your trees, and to identify if you have oak wilt as an issue. It needs to be dealt with very quickly, because new infection centers are created by little beetles that carry the disease from trees that were infected to trees that weren't. What happens is, when a tree dies from oak wilt and is left standing, something called a pressure pad or a fungal mat of black goo forms under the bark. But it is so powerful, it actually causes the bark to split. When that bark splits, the smell of that fungal mat or that black goo is released. The beetle is drawn to that. It's very sweet. And oak wood is very sweet smelling too, and I'm going to get to that in a minute. The fungal mat smells really good to the beetle. The beetle is drawn to it and scratches it. It contains the disease. It is actually all the disease. The beetle then leaves that fungal mat, but his body is covered in the disease. And as a result of that, when he goes to an uninfected tree and scratches a little bit, he deposits the fungus. Now, why would he go to an uninfected tree? As I said, oak wood is very sweet by itself. When you have, for whatever reason, fresh wounds on an oak tree, this beetle is drawn to those fresh wounds. Fresh wounds are made by pruning. The beetle can be drawn to a fresh cut on an oak tree within 5 minutes of that cut being made. That's how many of these beetles there are. There's multiple species. They're basically called picnic beetle, and there's about 6 different species that carry this disease. So they get it, pick it up by scratching that sweet smelling fungal mat, and carry it to a tree that's just been pruned, and they scratch the fresh cut, deposit the fungus, and if it's a red oak, it's dead in 3 weeks. So what happens then? Well, unfortunately, this disease moves similarly to Dutch elm. It goes up and it goes down. And when it goes down, it goes into the roots. And it goes from one set of roots to another. Those are called grafted roots. Trees of the same species graft roots. In other words, red oaks will graft with red oaks. White oaks will graft with white oaks. They very rarely graft interspecies. Reds with whites, very rarely, if ever, happens. But red oaks that are infected will pass it to any red oak that has roots that are grafted to the infected tree. So new infection centers are caused by the beetle, but the disease is then spread by the trees themselves. There is no chemical control for this disease. Once the tree is infected, it's dead. When I get an infected tree, an elm tree infected with Dutch elm disease, if I can get to it within a week of it being infected, I can inject it and stop the disease. I cannot stop this disease. Once the tree is infected, it's going to die. 2 years ago, a gentleman in the village of Franklin called me that he had received our letter explaining oak wilt, and had just had his oaks pruned, and 2 of them were showing symptoms, leaves dropping. I went out there, got out there the next day, and found 5 of his oaks infected with oak wilt. The neighbor's oak behind him had died a few weeks before, and he didn't know about oak wilt, so he had his oaks pruned. He had 15 oaks. They were all dead by the end of the summer. His house now sits in full sun and probably will for the next 50 years or so. It was a mistake that was made, completely unintentional, but it cost him every tree on his property. This disease is virulent, fast moving, and cannot be stopped once a tree is infected. So all you have to do is not prune your trees, your oaks, between March 15th and November 15th. That's when the beetle is alive. After that, the beetle goes to Miami to play shuffleboard, it dies, whatever. It's not around in the winter. It is not active in the winter. If you have to have your oaks pruned, and oaks are like any other tree, they do need occasional pruning. We do it during the winter only so that the wounds have time to heal over the winter and don't draw the beetle the following spring. If you have storm damage during the growing season and that limb's laying on your house and it's broken and shattered, you do have to have that cleaned up. What you need to have done is the guys come out, clean up the broken stump, get rid of the storm damage, and paint that wound with tree sealant immediately. Immediately, right after the cut's been made. If an oak dies from another cause, and they do, and you have to have the oak removed during the growing season, and the stump cannot be ground on the same day. In other words, they take the tree down, but they have to leave the stump, paint the stump. Because the beetle will be drawn to the stump, scratch the stump, deposit the fungus. The tree is no longer there, and the root system recognizes that. It is releasing everything into the soil. If it releases the minerals and the water and the content, it will release the fungus with it. If there are other red oaks within the root zone of that tree, they will become infected. This is everywhere in Michigan that oaks grow. And you can see most of it in the Upper Peninsula is where there's water, because oaks have a very high demand for water. In the middle of Michigan, you kind of look at that and you go, well, there's not a lot of water there, but there actually is. In the upper half of Michigan, very shallow water table. So the water's very close to the surface, and oaks are growing. Imagine this picture white. Not one oak left. 30% of the trees in the state of Michigan, dead, gone. It could happen, and we can stop it. Oak wilt is lethal. It cannot be stopped by man. It can be stopped by us. All we don't have to do is prune our trees during the growing season. And I hope you understand the importance, because 50% of Michigan is still covered by trees, believe it or not. We have 4 different kinds of forests here: a jack pine forest, the boreal forest, oak, hickory, and northern hardwoods. Oaks are part of 3 or 4 of those forests. If we lose the oaks, we lose a good percentage of 3 of our 4 forest types. Oaks comprise over 2 billion cubic feet of trees in this state. Without them, the ecology of the state will be changed forever. There are at least 6 insects that depend on these, 4 species of birds, and countless species of understory trees and ground cover and plant life that depend on oaks being above them to diffuse the light. Without oaks, most of those species will fail. Most of those animals and birds will disappear, and the insects, which are food sources for other animals. It would be a catastrophic environmental effect if we lose our oaks. So don't let it end here. When you go to your church groups, or you go to your poker club or your bridge club, or you're standing in line at the grocery store, tell your friends, tell your neighbors, do not prune oaks during the growing season. We can stop this disease. We have that ability. We need to do it. Thank you for listening. Hope you enjoyed it. And I'd like to thank ReLeaf Michigan for sponsoring this in cooperation with the Michigan Department of Natural Resources. If you want more information on tree plantings, workshops, presentations, there's the information. There is a Chinese proverb that is very appropriate. What is the best time to plant a tree? Today. What was the second best time to plant a tree? Tomorrow. Plant trees. We need as many as we can get. Thank you very much. Have a nice evening.
Thanks, Gary. We do have one question in the Q&A.
Sure.
Let me find it, pull it up here. I'm just going to read it to you and you can kind of respond how you'd like. I've been working to include mostly native plants on my home landscape, as they tend to benefit both the ecosystem and the homeowner with their resilience. Is the argument for the cultivars and non-native species just disease resistance and hardiness? What about their impact on the habitat?
No, the argument for invasives is the negative impact that they have. Invasives take over everything. They take water resources, mineral content. They change the environment, that things that are growing under them. They outcompete native plants, all of those things. So there's no upside to invasives at all. The native argument is good, but it has limitations, because the red maple I talked about, the red sunset or the October glory, are sold as native trees, even though they're cultivated. And as native trees, they are junk. They are no good. But a native red maple growing up in mid-Michigan is a magnificent tree and a wonderful tree. So if you take the cultivar aspect out of native trees are great. But unfortunately, trees are sold by their species, not their cultivar. So when you go to a nursery as a homeowner and you say, I want a red maple, 80%, 90% of nurseries will take you to the cultivated red maples, the October glory or the red sunset. And those are terrible trees to plant because of the root problems and the grafting issues and etc. So native by itself is not good. What's good is native species without cultivar being attached to it. That, I hope that kind of explains it.
Thanks. A couple more coming in. Let me read. Is there a resource to find out how large various tree roots get? Looking to plant several in a yard with a septic field and want to plan accordingly.
That's a good question. a resource on tree root. Tree root spreading is basically a mathematical equation. If the tree is going to get to 60 foot tall, the roots are probably going to spread to 60 foot wide. That's basic it. Now, having said that, there are three kinds of trees. Taproot trees, which have very deep roots. Heartroot trees, which have mid-level roots. And then flat root trees, which are the worst. Their roots are right on the surface. They're going to cause all kinds of problems. Classification, is there something, a document that I know of that classifies trees into their root categories? No, unfortunately, I don't think there is. I know there is a document that explains, that has like 3 or 4 examples of each kind of tree, but it doesn't break up all tree species into their root classification. So to be honest with you, no, I have never seen one, if there is one.
Thank you. Can you fix girdling roots? Can you just cut them?
Yep, absolutely. I've done root surgery now for over 20 years. The important thing is, when you do cut girdling roots, the cut must be clean. If you make a jagged cut, the tree expends more resources than it should in attempting to heal that cut, and it rarely can do it. And that ends up being a possible vector point or an entry point for disease organisms. So if you are going to remove a girdling root, do it with a very sharp hammer and chisel, or a saw, something that has a very sharp blade that's going to make a very clean cut. But yes, I remove girdling roots from trees all the time. Yep.
A specific question about a very mature Magnolia stellata that they discovered scale on this fall. Would the best defense be horticultural oil in the spring?
Nice call. Yes, it is. Suppressing the adults. The oil enters the female through a slit. The female has to open a slit to take in extra oxygen as she begins to grow, and the oil clogs that slit and suffocates the adult female before she can lay eggs. However, suppression of magnolia scale by horticultural oil is up around 60 to 70%, which means 30% are going to survive. The babies are going to hatch, and unfortunately, they are reverse scale. They do not hatch in the spring around June or July like most scale do. They hatch in late August, early September, depending on how much sunlight the tree is in. The warmer the tree, the sooner they hatch. So the earliest they're going to hatch is the last week of August. The latest they're going to hatch is probably the last week of September. At this point, what you're going to see are small, white, little babies that are going to go out to stems and go on to the undersides of the leaves, where they're going to mature and then move back onto the stems. It's at that point that you need to spray them again. Horticultural oil will kill the babies. I know I'm talking about killing babies. That does not sound good. But that is actually the best time to do it. When those babies hatch and they move out, they are unprotected. The problem with scale is they have a waxy outer covering over their body. So if you allow that if you allow that insect to mature, that waxy coating builds up. And then when you spray with any kind of pesticide, it just rolls off. So if you can catch the babies before that waxy coating builds up, you can control them with horticultural oil. So look to do the spring one to knock down as many adult females as you can, but also look toward the end of August, anywhere through September, depending on when you find the babies on the underside of the leaf. There'll be little white flecks, and they will be moving. So you can they're called crawlers. So they will be moving on the leaf. Spray again with horticultural oil, 1%, 2% mixture. It doesn't take much to kill them. Wow, we're getting a bunch, aren't we?
Yeah. Let's see. About blue spruce trees, if they are leaking sap around a pest invader, is it best to let the tree defend itself or use pesticide?
Okay, so what is happening there is actually, you are correct. That is a defense mechanism called a pitch out. You probably have spruce bark beetle attacking, which wouldn't surprise me. About everything attacks a blue spruce. And yes, it is better to leave the sap. What ends up happening is, as the beetle drills into the tree, it allows oxygen to sneak in. The tree senses that, puts sap out as a defense mechanism to get all over the insect and suffocate it. So yes, a pitch out is a defense mechanism by the tree, and it is best to leave it alone. And I will tell you something else. If the tree has the strength to do a pitch out, it has the strength to survive. It is the trees that can't pitch out because they're so weak, that can't defend itself against attack like this, those are the ones that are in trouble. This one sounds like it is not in trouble, and it's doing exactly what it would do in nature, which is pitching out.
I've had a couple of questions about wondering if either the PowerPoint presentation would be available somewhere, or is there a handout that you'd have?
Yeah, I can email this if it'll fit in an email. I can email it to Melinda, and then she can post it somewhere. You guys can have the stuff, sure.
Okay, sounds great. So everyone that has RSVP'd, we already have your email address. We'll send out a follow-up with the link to both the recording of this webinar and then the PowerPoint presentation. And I'll type my email into the chat. So if anybody didn't RSVP to this and just joined with the Zoom link, you can send me an email with your contact information and I'll get this information to you.
I got 3 autumn purple ash. Donna was asking about autumn purples here. Planted in 2001. Yes, please take care of those. Ash, I'm sure you're aware of, is a rare commodity nowadays. The best time to prune almost any tree is late summer, fall. Less stressful. Michigan's cooled off. There's less resource demand on the tree. The tree is kind of shifting into a dormancy. I don't like that word. Dormant trees are dead. Trees never stop vascular movement. They change their emphasis from up to down, but they never stop. So there's not, this dormant thing does not exist. But fall is a much better time to prune, especially an ornamental tree like an autumn purple. Cool. That's it, I think.
Yeah, I think so. Is
that it? Any other questions? That was excellent, Gary. Thank you so much. Talk about a wealth of knowledge, and it's the best explanation of oak wilt I have heard. So very to the point. Thank you so much for that.
Thank you.
For taking the time. And as all of you saw, Gary is with SavATree. So as part of the PowerPoint, his contact information will be there. We've known SavATree and formerly Mike's Tree Surgeons. They've been with us for all 32 years of our existence, so we can't thank them enough for them being one of the sponsors overall of ReLeaf Michigan, and in particular of this presentation. So please stay in touch, and we hope to continue this series of homeowner presentations in the early part of 2021. So with that, unless there's anything else, do you see any more, Ashley?
No, I don't. I hope I didn't miss anything, but.
All right. Well, thank you all very much and have a great evening.
You too. Thank you for having me. Good night.
Good night.